orang nih, Kak.
Booking tiket. Check in, ding, check in. Salah. Kembali.
Gimana?
Check in mana check in, Bre?
All right, a very good afternoon for everyone, our honorable guests, members of our media and community partners, and all participants. My name is Nurhama Muriski. I'm a member of the Indonesia Youth Foundation in the Strategy and Management Division, and I will be your master of ceremony for today's. First thing first, I'd like to thank everyone who's taken their time to take part in the International Youth Forum of Public Issue Diplomacy. We surely hope that this seminar will be an incredible learning outcome for everyone. Indonesia Youth Foundation is a non-government public diplomacy organization focused on promoting a better understanding of Indonesia and bridging friendship with the international community. As we have stated in the email sent yesterday, all participants may share the link of this meeting and invite 3 of your friends to take part in the seminar. Register and invited participants will be able to obtain e-certificate for as long as you fill out the claiming form, which will be given at the end of the meeting. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Fauzi Wahyu Zamzami, our founder and president, to present our welcoming speech. Mr. Fauzi, you may have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Mumur, for opening this forum. Good afternoon, everyone, or maybe good morning, or maybe good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our forum. Welcome to International Youth Forum on Public Diplomacy Issue by Indonesia Youth Foundation. First of all, I would like to say thank you so much to all of you, to all participants who attend this forum, who join this forum. Maybe in this weekend you have something that you want to do. You will be a holiday, you will be on holiday, you will go somewhere, but you still here to study together to learn more about the public diplomacy issue. And second, I would like to say thank you to all great speaker who can be our speaker in this program, and it's such an honor for us to have a great speaker today, which will share on how public diplomacy issue thrive in this COVID-19 situation. And third, I would like to say thank you so much to all of the committee from Indonesia Youth Foundations who held this a very huge forum ever, and it will be interesting for us to discussion here. Uh, Here, I would like to say that Indonesia Youth Foundations today is really huge in less than 1 year. Indonesia Youth Foundations, before as told by the MC, as a non-government public diplomacy organizations which focusing on promoting a better understanding of Indonesia and bridging friendship with the international community. In less than 1 year, we did all activities such as International Youth Forum, Indonesian language course for foreigner, and so on. And this forum, as we now together, I would like to say a bit about the public diplomacy. As we know together that public diplomacy is a very important aspect for every country in this world. Public diplomacy itself will always have a very significant influence on the development of every country, as well as cooperations between countries. From the many definitions of public diplomacy, I always believe that public diplomacy is about how particular country or community affect public opinion. From this influence emerged the role of country to establish the cooperations in terms of politics, economy, educations, and so on. But in this COVID-19 era, or even before COVID-19, I will take one of example. We all know that the trend of K-pop, K-drama, and other Korean culture is getting higher in Indonesia. It is undeniable that this trend had a profound impact on the relationship between Indonesia and South Korea. Apart from between countries, we can also see many e-commerce such as Tokopedia, Bukalapak, Blibli.com, and so on that use Korean artists as their brand ambassador. This proves that South Korea soft power through its public diplomacy is very strong. However, we always still have the questions in these COVID-19 situations. Is this situation still same before COVID-19 and after COVID-19? Is there a huge impact, or maybe it's getting lower? So here in this forum, we will study more. We will study directly with a very great speaker. And for all of you guys, do not hesitate to ask questions, respond to, or even give suggestions and criticism to all discussions in this forum. We are waiting for you, and thank you so much. I hope you enjoy this forum. Thank you and goodbye.
All right, thank you so much for the brilliant welcome, Mr. Fauzi. Next, I would like to welcome Ms. Emira Anjani as our project leader to deliver her short opening speech. Ms. Emira, you may have the floor.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my very pleasure to see you here today. My name is Emira Anjani. I am a part of the division of social media and content creator in Indonesia Youth Foundation, and I am the project leader of the International Youth Forum of Public Diplomacy issue. First thing first, I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to everyone in this room. Our honorable guest speaker, Mrs. Vanessa Boy, Mrs. Mia Agung, and Mr. Radityo, welcome and thank you for your contribution to our event. We cannot wait to see what you have in store for us. Delegates from our community partner. I can see that we have some delegates from AIESEC Bandung, African Youth Architect, as well as Pembina UKM from Malaysia in the audience. Thank you so much for making the time to attend this event. I hope that through this, we could strengthen our relationship and further cooperation. A special thank you to all the Indonesian Youth Foundation Committee for trusting me as the project leader, the endless support, and of course, the hours and the efforts that you've put into organizing this event. And last but not least, I'd like to thank and welcome all of the general participants. I surely hope that IYFPD will be a new learning outcome for you. As we all know, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has affected many parts of our life, starting from school and university, workplace, clothing, and even health. Now, diplomacy is another sector that is heavily affected by this pandemic, though we may not be able to see it as it is quite an exclusive community and area. Unlike traveling, clothing, and school, diplomacy is not an area that can easily be modified or even halted overnight. This is due to the fact that diplomacy is one of the key that determine the relationship between nations. Thus, any changes must require the consensus of the nations that are involved. With that being said, the IYFPD focuses on exploring some of the impacts of COVID-19 to one sector of diplomacy, which is the public diplomacy. We will cover some of the facts that are currently happening in the world, and I must say that we are very lucky to be able to learn it directly from such brilliant individuals, our guest speakers. Now I'm going to hand it back to Kamumur for her to get the show started. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great day today.
All right, thank you, Ms. Emira, for your very great speech. All right, then our next session will be guided by our moderator for today. And with that being said, may I welcome Ms. Rainesha Zavira Kutratulai.
All right. Thank you very much to our MC, Ms. Mumur, for the introduction and the warm welcome. Before we begin, I would like to take some time to introduce myself. My name is Rainesha Zafira. I am the coordinator of international cooperation in Indonesia Youth Foundation, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for today's event. For our first topic of discussion, our expert speaker will be discussing about how a country faces economic and technological problems in the era of Society 5.0 amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. With the rise of digital economies and technological advancement, there is no doubt that multiple nations have been struggling to keep up with the growing trend of e-commerce, trade, and other economic activities. Compounded with the COVID-19 pandemic, countries have to fight in order to adapt to the current conditions and not fall behind with the rest of the world. The urgency for adaptability and flexibility in the economic and technological fields is very important now more than ever. Global economy has become a battleground for survival with countries on the brink of potential economic collapse. Today, our first speaker, the Honorable Ms. Anak Agung Mia Intantilia, will talk a little bit about adaptive measures and strategies of how a country is able to overcome these economic and technological problems during the era of Society 5.0 and the COVID-19 pandemic. Ms. Anak Agung Mia Intantilia is very passionate about pursuing a career in academia. She has obtained a master's degree in international relations, political science, political communication, public diplomacy, European integration, and Southeast Asian studies. She is also a part of the 2017 ASEAN Youth Ambassador. She likes to spread information about the 3 pillars of the ASEAN community. Apart from that, she also contributes to women and youth empowerment by providing English language education and mentorship programs and creating youth networks through her social enterprise. She is also a frequent speaker at seminars, both nationally and internationally. Ms. Anak Agung Mia Intantilia is currently working as a lecturer at Pendidikan Nasional and University in Bali and is a professional MC. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Her Excellency, Ms. Anak Agung Mia Intantilia. Ms. Mia, the floor is yours. You have 50 minutes.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you so much for the kind introduction from the moderator. Greetings from Bali here. It's nice to see you guys all virtually. I hope one day I can see you all in person here in Bali, maybe to welcome you all. But I hope you guys are still excited to join this event. And it's such an honor for me to be part of this very amazing initiative made by young people. So I do really appreciate all the committee for your effort to make this kind of collaboration, and of course to all the participants as well. Okay, so I have 15 minutes and I'm going to talk about public diplomacy and the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you guys all see my presentation? I hope so. Yeah? Okay, cool. All right, as mentioned by the moderator earlier, my name is Agung Mia. I'm the head of ASEAN International Studies Center here at Universitas Pendidikan Nasional in Bali. And I'm also a professional MC and a lecturer. And I have some educational background in terms of international relations. I graduated from Udayana University for my Bachelor of International Relations and Master of International Relations and International Organization at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. So today, talking about public diplomacy, as mentioned earlier at the beginning by Fauzi, talking about public diplomacy is very interesting. It's a thing where we can see a connection. When we talk about public diplomacy, we can talk about various issues. We can talk about various aspects. And here, when we talk about public diplomacy, it is not only about how government or how state can interact with people, but it is also about the involvement, the active involvement of people. So it's about government, a connection between government with people, people with people, and also a hybrid of the two. Therefore, we can see when we talk about public diplomacy, we can see how all aspects actually can contribute actively to one another. And talking about public diplomacy, actually, we are talking about several important aspects. It also includes cultural understanding. It includes relationship building. It has been mentioned earlier about influencing opinion. That's actually correct. How we can influence opinion of the public and how public can actually support or how public can criticize or how public can perceive certain information or how public can process certain policies made by the government. And it is also about engagement of identities. It's also about how we can see the value of each country and how we can see the norms of each country and the background behind all of those identities, value, and also norms. Moreover, when we talk about public diplomacy, we are also actually talking about soft power. Talking about soft power, as maybe most of you already know this, talking about soft power is actually very important in order to attract others, in order to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion. And public diplomacy is an important tool to promote a country's soft power. So whenever you learn about public diplomacy, IR scholars, IR students, I'm sure you are familiar with the term soft power. So in this context, what we are doing right now, the International Youth Forum on Public Diplomacy, it is actually the way we cope with the change. It is actually the way we adapt to change from youth perspective. I'd like to invite everyone, if it's possible, to participate on chat box. because I would like to hear from you as well. I'm sure before the COVID-19 pandemic, you guys have actively participated in various student exchange program, Model United Nations, youth conference, any kind of activities that actually contribute to cultural understanding, mutual understanding, and people-to-people contact. Please kindly type on chat box. Please kindly type on chat box one of the most memorable experience or one of the most memorable programs that you have attended previously before the COVID-19 pandemic. When was it? Type the name of the program or the name of the MUN or the name of the student exchange program to bring back your memory, to recall your memory before the COVID-19 pandemic, and also mention the year. So we can see here on how all of you are actually part of public diplomacy, because I'm sure that you guys all have a lot of experience previously. So please kindly, you can type it here so I can read it and everyone else can also read it, your previous experience in terms of any kind of student exchange program. I've shared my a little bit of my experience, and I'm sure that you guys miss it. You guys miss this in-person interaction. You guys miss on how you can interact with other people as part of doing actually or being involved in public diplomacy. And answering the question asked by the committee on this regard, how do countries conduct public diplomacy during the COVID-19 pandemic, and what are the challenges in terms of technology? Because there are two questions asked to me about the economic challenge and also the technological challenge, and both are different. So today, in this 15 minutes, I'd like to address more on the technological challenge, on how we conduct public diplomacy during the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges emerge, especially in terms of the technological aspect. How do countries conduct public diplomacy? The answer is, has it changed? Yes, it has. And how? Countries actually adapt by focusing more on digital public diplomacy. When we talk about digital public diplomacy, we can see from 2 points of view. We can see from the opportunity, and we also have to admit that there are some challenges that we face when we talk about digital public diplomacy. Because with the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously we have to adjust, we have to limit in-person interaction, we have to be able to talk to people, to do the conference, to still spread information, to still influence the public through digital technology. So digital public diplomacy is something that's currently becoming a trend right now, with opportunity and also challenge. And talking about digital public diplomacy in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, we see and we acknowledge that the COVID-19 pandemic has actually accelerated the digital transformation, including the way to conduct public diplomacy. So previously, before the COVID-19 pandemic, I have to share this and highlight this to everyone here, that actually Indonesia, before the COVID-19 pandemic in September 2019, has already initiated regional conference on digital diplomacy. So this is actually a very important moment and a very important initiative made by Indonesia here, by acknowledging the importance of talking and the importance of making a collaboration, the importance of discussing about regional digital diplomacy. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, state has already talked about digital diplomacy and how we can use it actually to communicate more with public. And at that time, Minister Retno Marsudi mentioned 4 important aspects, 4 important goals of digital diplomacy: to disseminate peace messages. And when we see it from the context of public diplomacy, obviously, disseminating peace messages is highly crucial in order to spread peace messages, in order to build awareness, in order to make people believe in the idea of peaceful world, and in order to make people contribute to reach this kind of a peaceful situation. And the second one is about improving economic partnership. By using digital diplomacy mentioned earlier, obviously the advancement of digital technology right now in terms of economic aspect is very, very significant. Therefore, we can use that also to improve economic partnership, to protect citizens by providing more and easier access, and also as instrument to advance the development. Okay, so how do we see the opportunity of conducting public diplomacy in terms of digital diplomacy amidst the COVID-19 pandemic? Because I'm a lecturer, I'm going to use this conceptual framework as part of my argument. So the conceptual framework, to see the opportunity here, I'm using the concept of 3 layers of public diplomacy. Maybe some of you are familiar with this concept. It's a concept of public diplomacy derived from the work by Cohen and also Arsenault in 2008, by saying that when we see public diplomacy, it's a very broad topic. It's a very broad aspect. And now I'd like to simplify it by seeing from only these 3 layers of public diplomacy. By seeing the first one on how we see a one-way interaction, or what we call as monologue, the way the political actors, the way government in this context communicate by giving a statement to mass audiences. That's the first one, one-way interaction. The second one is the two-way interaction, what we call as dialogue. So instead of only giving a statement from one particular institution or one particular official, one particular political actor, dialogue enable us to have engagement, to have exchange of ideas, to have exchange of information, to have discussion with two-way interaction. And the third one is in terms of collaboration. So other than having the exchange of ideas and exchange of information, it is also important to have the sort of collaboration which can involve the citizen directly to pursue a common purpose in various activities. Now let's see these 3 concepts, 3 layers of public diplomacy in a real life, in real example right now during the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic. The first one is the monologue, the one-way interaction. How did the technology help or enables us to still have this one-way interaction? How do we get help from the technology to still spread a lot of information to people, to keep the public updated with current condition, to keep the public engaged with the new ideas, new information, new policies that are being spread, that are being taught, that are being discussed right now? So in terms of having important news, in terms of giving official statement or speech and also press release, we can use the official website and official social media accounts. So for instance, I took an example here from the official website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, and I'm sure other Ministry of Foreign Affairs are also doing the same thing. They have their update, they have their press release, they have their speech that can be accessed by people. So people, if you are students and you want to know more information, you want to find out new updates, latest information, you can go to their official website, social media accounts, so that they have this one-way interaction to give you the information, to give you the opportunity to access the information. And on the left side, if you can read ASEAN Diplomacy during the pandemic, I recently published my work entitled ASEAN Diplomacy during the pandemic on how ASEAN as a regional organization used Twitter as well as part of its diplomacy. So diplomacy is a Twitter diplomacy, a growing aspect of public diplomacy, especially digital public diplomacy as well, to actually research more on how government institution, on how actors, political actors utilize Twitter as part of their diplomacy to connect with people. Because I believe you guys are familiar with Twitter. I'm sure maybe all of you have Twitter accounts and you check it, and maybe that's your source of information, so you can check there. And ASEAN diplomacy during the pandemic also show that ASEAN also utilized Twitter as part of its diplomacy to spread information to public. That's the first one. One-way interaction, giving information, giving official statement, giving press release to public. So public get information and public hopefully can give support to whatever policies that are being informed. The second one is dialogue or a two-way interaction. Here we see with COVID-19 pandemic, maybe before COVID-19 pandemic, we see a lot of focus group discussion. We can meet with people, we can interact directly, we can discuss directly, but right now, because of the limitation, then we see that states and government use their social media accounts to keep the public engagement. I took two screenshots here from the official Instagram accounts of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia by showing on how they try to engage with young people by having this kind of a Q&A, by having Instagram TV programs such as 30 Minutes Around the World to show the activities and program by the Embassy of Indonesia in other countries. For instance, in this context is in Tokyo. And also on the right side, you can see how students of Indonesia in New Zealand participate by talking about cultural diplomacy, by talking about the role of young people. So this kind of two-way interaction enables you to ask questions, to share your thoughts, to type on the chat box, to ask something. And we have this kind of an exchange idea and exchange information that will enable public engagement, even though we don't meet in person, we don't meet like face to face. Another thing is to have quiz, to have online focus group discussion, for instance, to have this kind of a forum. And I myself personally joined several focus group discussion conducted by some ministries of Indonesia and also with my colleague from Australia, for instance, that enables us to have two-way interaction amid the COVID-19 pandemic. That's the second one, dialogue, two-way interaction. The third one is what we call as collaboration. With the advancement of technology, but also with the strict limitation because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we now see the growing trend of what we call as hybrid event. So you have some event where just some speakers or just a few numbers of people actually attend directly after obviously you show your test result that you have to be negative, and then you can attend in the venue and you wear mask obviously and some other health protocol. And the participants, they can still listen to you, they can still get information from their respective location, from their homes. They don't have to attend to the particular venue, but still can get information, still can collaborate, still can talk. And how about cultural performances? Because earlier I said that cultural diplomacy is also part of public diplomacy. And when you guys attended maybe some sort of student exchange or international program or international forum, you usually can see cultural performance that make you respect new culture, that make you want to learn something new, understand something new. Here, with this hybrid event, we can still have the collaboration through cultural performance, but it's through pre-recorded video, right? So we cannot really see right away all of the people who are performing their arts and culture, but through pre-recorded video with limited in-person interaction. In terms of economic, I'm gonna just talk a little bit about that. For instance, in this collaboration and hybrid event, I was there for Bali Democracy Forum back then in 2020, last year, and I had the pleasure to talk about students' perspective and also the economic pillars. Talking about the micro, small, and medium enterprises, with this kind of collaborative event, with this kind of collaboration through hybrid event, they can still display their products during the event. However, it is limited. So they can have their offline display. They also have their online display, their online video, their online photo. So people who are not there can still see through online websites, can see through their online social media accounts. And that's actually also support the economic pillars, and especially at that time support the micro, small, and medium enterprises who are attending the event. So collaboration is still possible for public diplomacy, although it shifts towards what we call as hybrid event. So those are how countries engage, how countries adapt to the practice of public diplomacy, especially by utilizing digital public diplomacy, digital technology through those three ways of monologue, one-way interaction, dialogue, two-way interaction, and also collaboration. That's the opportunity. How about the challenges? I do admit, and we all acknowledge, that this kind of new situation requires us to adapt. There are a lot of challenges that we face, but these challenges are not only for us, are not only for students or young people, but I believe everyone also encounter some sort of challenges that they have to deal with, including in terms of public diplomacy, including in terms of digital public diplomacy, and especially we want to talk about the technological problems and technological challenge here. I highlighted 4 major challenges that I'm going to talk today, and feel free to add more challenges should you think that you face different challenges or you observe different challenges. The first one is technical difficulties and generational gap. When we want to conduct public diplomacy, we are actually involving various aspects, many actors, with one with more experience, and sometimes technical difficulties happen. We want to conduct a forum. At the beginning, there's a connection problem, somehow your microphone is in trouble, sometimes your camera doesn't work, sometimes there are a lot of noise or any kind of technical difficulties. And we have to admit that that's not only a problem of the participants or committee, but even until the state level, we encounter these technical difficulties. I myself, personally, when I joined one of the hybrid events, I experienced it by myself. A high-level forum, a high-level meeting also encountered technical difficulties. We didn't expect that a very prestigious hotel here in Bali can also have Wi-Fi problem, can also have any technical difficulties. The camera didn't work, and that kind of technical difficulties also affect the way we conduct public diplomacy, or in this context, digital public diplomacy. And talking about generational gap as well, when you are ready, young people are usually, it's easier for young people to adapt to this new technology. But how about those generation who cannot adapt as easy as all of us can easily switch to Zoom and switch to WebEx and switch to Google Meet, and some part of other generation, they find difficulties actually to talk on that, and that's actually affect the conduct of public diplomacy and digital diplomacy. The second one is regarding digital connectivity and digital divide. So when we conduct public diplomacy and we focus on the way we conduct public diplomacy with digital technology, we can reach more audience on one hand, because we can invite more people. If you want to hear my lecture, you don't have to come to Bali. You can just turn on your laptop and you can hear my lecture. If we want to hear a professor from the US, we don't have to go there. We can just simply turn on our laptop and have the code and access, and then we can have more information. But that kind of a privilege are only for people who has access to proper internet connection and who has access to technology. But how about digital connectivity and digital divide, where we cannot, as a part of public diplomacy, reach a diverse audiences, when we cannot simply just reach everyone, because usually we come to one place and other place and attend and socialize directly with people. And now we cannot do that. And therefore we change it with a digital or virtual event. But those people who has no proper internet connection and access to technology are getting more difficulties in terms of accessing information and in terms of getting the exposure of public diplomacy. Therefore, this is the second challenge that we encounter when we talk about public diplomacy, especially from technological perspective. The third one is when we talk about public diplomacy in terms of technology, yes, obviously technology has helped us to connect with everyone amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. But here we also face a challenge, what we call as infodemic. So other than pandemic, we also encounter infodemic. Infodemic is a situation where there are a lot of misinformation and disinformation, even malinformation on social media. And it creates some sort of challenge because public diplomacy aims to inform people, inform the public, and then shape the public opinion. But the opinion of the public can be shaped by fake news, by hoaxes that you see on social media. And if you cannot really filter yourself, if you cannot really try to verify any kind of information, it's very easy for us to click and share information to other people, and people cannot really comprehend and process that and share it to others. So infodemic and pandemic is one of the big challenges that we encounter, especially when using digital technology, because the easier the information can be accessed, the easier people can send it to everyone else, and the easier any kind of misinformation can happen. Therefore, the challenge for public diplomacy is the growing demand of a transparent and accountable government, on how government can provide information, on how government can provide a lot of a valid source that can be trusted, that can show their policies, that can take the responsibility of the news and information that are being spread to the people. And the last one, the challenge for the conduct of public diplomacy amid the COVID-19 pandemic is the lack of personal connection. Yes, we can still have this international youth forum. Yes, we can still make new friends. Yes, we can know each other and see each other virtually, but personal connection is also important, right? The way you meet someone, the way you have this direct interaction, the way you shake someone else's hands, and the way you have this informal conversation. Because I'm sure if you have any kind of international experience or exposure previously, it is not only about the formal session. It is not only about when you attend a seminar or when you hear the speaker and that's it. But informal conversations are also very important. You have discussion over coffee break, you have discussion over lunch or dinner session, you talk, you connect, and then you create this kind of a network, share ideas, because sometimes you can share your ideas not through the formal session, but through the informal conversation. So that's also the challenge in terms of public diplomacy on how to keep this personal connection, how to keep people connected, how to create a lot of innovative and creative way to keep people engaged, to still have this kind of a connection, to build network amidst limited number of people and limited direct interaction. So lack of personal connection is also a challenge of a public diplomacy in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. Those are the four challenges. And to end my presentation, this is my last slide for my presentation. Talking about COVID-19 pandemic, obviously we are trying to adjust our way. Obviously, we are trying to adapt. We are trying to do our best amidst a lot of restriction or limitation to do something. And here I'd like to show you a quote that I got that said, diplomacy lingua franca in the 19th century was French, and it was English, and now it's the mastery of digital tools and platform. So you have to adapt to this situation, and you have to know on how to do your best amidst all of the limitation, and to find out in a very innovative and creative way to still conduct the public diplomacy, to still keep the engagement with the public. That's the end of my presentation. I thank you guys very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to have discussion. And if you want to talk to me further and to connect, feel free to write me an email. This is my email address and also my Instagram account, so we can connect, and hopefully we can have more collaboration in the future. Thank you very much, and I'll give the time back to moderator.
All right, thank you very much for our speaker, Ms. Mia. Thank you very much for the very insightful presentation. Personally, I really loved the way that you wrapped up the presentation, highlighting how in the 19th century, the lingua franca for diplomacy was French, and then moving to English, and now digital literacy. That was very interesting for me personally. To summarize the presentation, public diplomacy is defined by the activity of building connections between nations. It can involve multiple social cultural aspects, as well as involve some soft power as a means for negotiation. Diplomacy during COVID-19 specifically has its own opportunities and challenges. The opportunities has been laid out as the 3 layers of public diplomacy. The first of which is monologue, which is the one-way interaction, creating accessibility of information for the general public through press release, news, official statements, and the importance of official websites for government bodies. The second layer is dialogue, which is a 2-way interaction, emphasizing on exchange of ideas and public engagement. This can be conducted via online seminars or online focus group discussions, among many others. The final layer is collaboration, which is the active involvement of the public and can require some hybrid between the online and offline spheres. Meanwhile, the challenges of public diplomacy in COVID-19 includes technical difficulties with the generational gap, digital connectivity and the digital divide regarding how not everybody has the access to digital needs, such as internet connection, and the spread of misinformation and disinformation, or as our speaker has put it, the infodemic, which leads to the demand for transparency and accountability for national governments. And the final challenge is the lack of personal connection. So now we will move to a 10-minute question and answer session. As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the chat box with the format of your name, the institution that you came from, and then your question. Or if you would like to ask a question directly to the speaker, you could use the raise hand feature and we will open the floor to your question. So I can see here that we have someone who has raised their hand. So you may open your mic and you may ask a question.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to say thank you so much for the beautiful material from Miss Mia. And I would like to thank you so much for this opportunity to ask a question. So you previously mentioned that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we were forced to switch from the conventional way to online or virtual public diplomacy. And considering the fact that we are in the middle of digital era, do you think this method of public diplomacy is more effective than the conventional way, or is it relatively same? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the question. Ms. Mia, you may have the floor to answer.
Thank you very much for the question. If I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong. The question was, do I think that the shift from conventional public diplomacy through this digital public diplomacy is more effective or not? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So as a researcher and a lecturer, I cannot generalize everything. So it depends on which part that you think is the most effective. We cannot simply say without conducting research or without collecting data that it is 100% more effective or it is 100% less effective. It depends on which area that we are talking about. If we're talking about engagement with people in terms of a cost-effective measure, it is more effective, because then you don't have to conduct a seminar, for instance, in a certain hotel room and then invite everybody and everybody has to book their own hotel room and then we have to provide the meal and everything. But you just stay in your home and have this kind of a 2 hours, 3 hour session, and that's it. So in terms of cost, it's more effective. The second one, if you talk about in terms of the engagement to wider audience, if you have this kind of international youth forum in one place, for instance, in Jakarta, and you invite 100 students there, and you only have an offline interaction with those 100 students, then you reach 100 students only. But if you stream it live on YouTube, maybe more than 100% can get the information. So in terms of having wider audience, yes, it is more effective. But how about when you want to talk about, is it more effective to engage diverse audience in terms of those who live not in big cities or those who live with less internet connection or less access to technology? Is that more effective? The answer is no. Because for them, then the traditional public diplomacy, when you have to go there, talk to them directly, and then show them information and explain to them nicely and step by step, that would be the best way. And that would be a more effective way to engage with people. So I think we cannot really generalize everything as more effective or not. It depends on which part of public diplomacy and who are the target of the public diplomacy, who are your targeted participants or who are your targeted audience, and what's the aim of that particular public diplomacy. I've had this discussion with some diplomats of Indonesia as well, when they said that having a focus group discussion, like this kind of a focus group discussion, and engaging with young people who are now think that digital information and this kind of activity, because you have online class every day for on your campus as well, so you are getting used to this kind of a method. For you guys, it's fine. But if we want to reach other audience, not young people, it might be challenging. It might be more difficult to engage with them. So it depends on which aspect and who are the participants that are being the target of this particular public diplomacy. That's my answer. Thank you very much. Very interesting question.
Great. Thank you very much for the answer. I believe there was another raised hand earlier. I believe it was from Mr. Ose. If you would like to ask your question now, you may unmute and you can ask the speaker directly. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, the speaker, for a wonderful presentation, and I'm sure it's well dissolved in our memory. My question here is, I want to know, among the 3 layers of the public diplomacy, which one is commonly used, and how best can it ensure that information during this pandemic is being transferred from one place to the other?
Okay, thank you for the question. How do I call you?
John, also John.
So should I call you John?
Yeah.
Okay, John, hi. Thank you for your question. So your question is from those 3 layers of public diplomacy that I've mentioned, which one do I think is the most used or the most commonly used? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. So it depends on the organization or the institution that you are observing. For instance, my master's thesis talked about these 3 layers of public diplomacy in the context of ASEAN. So when you use these 3 layers in the context of certain country, the result may be different from one country to other country, because each country, they have their own specific strategy. They have their own specific programs. But to give you certain overview of that, usually at least the first layer, the one-way interaction, is like the basic layer of conducting public diplomacy. So government, at least they give their official information. Sometimes they don't have the second one. Sometimes they don't have this kind of two-way interaction. Sometimes they just share the information and that's it. No feedback, no discussion, no exchange of ideas. But some others, they have this kind of the second layer of public diplomacy by enabling people to give comments, enabling people to share their thoughts, to share their opinion, to share their critics, to give suggestions, to have the second one. And the third one, the collaboration. There are some countries who are highly encouraging their citizens to have this kind of collaboration. Indonesia, as an example, for instance, in my personal experience, actively encourage students and academics in this context to participate in various public diplomacy. For instance, in the context of Bali Democracy Forum, they have some pillars that involve public. They involve micro, small, and medium enterprises. They involve media and civil society organization. They involve students, and then they involve high panel, which consists of like ministers or ambassadors. So they have these all steps of public diplomacy. So I guess if you want to ask which one is commonly used, it depends on which country that you are talking about. But my personal experience here in Indonesia, I see those 3 layers are being used. Those 3 layers are being used. And in the context of ASEAN, as I researched that previously, those 3 layers are being used as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome.
All right. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the answer. I believe we will only be having time for one more question, which I will be picking from the question box. So we have a question from Ms. Tiffany Pamela from Brawijaya University. I want to ask you something. We can say that the use of technology is increasing during the pandemic, but how about the effectiveness of public diplomacy in rural areas? Is there any regulations to make them receive the same digital information like everybody else?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. And I just had a conversation with my friends as well, talking about public diplomacy in a rural area. And here, even though we have to acknowledge the digital limitation and we have to acknowledge the current situation of digital divide here in Indonesia, that not every place and not everyone have access to certain internet connection and digital technology, but we also have to find out a real solution, not by just waiting for the problem of digital divide to be solved somehow, but to actually contribute something. And here, some research has shown that on how to give more information to people in the context of public diplomacy, there is a certain increase and significant contribution made by civil society organization, an NGO, where they try to provide certain information, they try to provide certain assistance, they try to provide certain programs or events made by public, made by people, so without the involvement of the government. I can give you a real example of the case study that I can see every day here in Bali. So it is not, it is a problem that digital divide even still happen here in Bali. Not everybody get access to technological privilege and access and tools and internet connection and everything. But here, at every village, we have the youth organization, like youth organization based on culture and youth organization based on tradition. So we have it here at every village in Bali. So the role of these organization, youth organization in every village, they try to share information. They try to give update to people in remote areas. What are the updates regarding COVID-19 pandemic, regarding the current regulation, how to properly wear masks, how to properly wash their hands, even like small information like that. For us, we hear that every day. Maybe we're sick of that. Like, okay, I understand that already, but how about those people in remote areas? I do acknowledge the challenge that public diplomacy cannot be equally accessed in all places in Indonesia or even in other parts of the world as well. But at least the role of civil society organizations, small foundation, young people, here is very important. So I think that is the possible solution that we can do together in order to actually try to contribute something by realizing the problem of digital connectivity and digital divide that we are all facing together. So instead of just waiting for a certain regulation or waiting for a certain I don't know, solution that can happen somehow and solve the problem, let's encourage each other. Let's do something that actually can give information, at least small information, yet very meaningful and impactful to the closest community surrounding us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful answer. Unfortunately, that would be the last question for this Q&A session. So I believe this will conclude the session for this time. So thank you very much to everyone who has asked a question. And once again, thank you very much to Ms. Mia for the new insights and for answering the questions, as well as for the wonderful presentation from earlier. And so now I will be returning to our Master of Ceremony. Ms. Mumur, you may have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rainey. Now, before we move on to the short break, may I welcome our next speaker, Ms. Vanessa Boy, the President of Global Action Italy and G7 Head Delegate of Global Summit 2020, to deliver her insight on the topic of the major and minor impacts of COVID-19 on the communication of public diplomacy between countries. You may ask questions via the chat box or use the raise hand feature, which will be answered at the end of the presentation. Before that, I would like to ask everyone to open their camera on if possible. Once again, I request everyone to turn the camera on if possible. Okay then, Ms. Vanessa, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this introduction, and in particular, thank you to everyone for the invitation. I really appreciate the work of Indonesian Youth Foundation in organizing such kind of event for young people. In particular, now we really need to discuss and talk in particular about diplomacy. So it's amazing your work, and thank you very much for inviting me. So I would like now to share my screen. 1 second. Okay, so first of all, before starting deepening in the main topic of my presentation, I just want to tell you more about myself. Well, as the moderator said, I'm from Italy. I'm 26 years old. In particular, I'm from Sardinia. That is this small island that you can see maybe on the map. In Italy, I also suggest you to search for Sardinia on the internet. You will be very much surprised of the amazing place where I'm lucky to live. I studied in Rome. In particular, I'm also based in Rome mainly for my work and my studies. And I studied languages and international relations in Rome. And at the moment, I'm attending a postgraduate master in diplomatic studies. I choose to put these pictures because I'd like to underline my very strong relation with Indonesia. In particular, in this picture here on the right, I'm participating in the Bali Democracy Forum 2 years ago. I was really lucky to have the great chance to represent Italy in this amazing international forum, thanks also to the Embassy of Indonesia in Italy that involved me. And you can see also here a picture with me and your ambassador in Rome, that we were celebrating our cooperation together. And this was amazing. So I feel really connected with Indonesian people. And thank you once again for inviting me. And in particular, I would also like to share with you my work. And I think it's also why I've been asked to discuss here today, as I define myself and my work as a part of public diplomacy here in Italy. So I'm president of Global Action, as the moderator said, and Global Action is a not-for-profit organization that is based in Rome, in Italy. And Global Action has the main objective of giving young people the opportunity to have access to free educational programs in the field of diplomacy. So we do this thanks to our network of 70 embassies in Italy and in international institutions and also international organizations such as the UN agencies based in Rome. So our mission is, as I said, to give quality education programs to young people. You maybe know that sometimes it's quite hard to have access for free to high-level programs. So what we do is to give this chance to both Italian and also international students. And we discuss, of course, about diplomacy, but not only diplomacy, such as sustainability, the SDGs, education. And to do this, we involve the embassies and in first person, the diplomats, the ambassadors, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Italian representatives. So in some way, we give the institutions and the world of diplomacy the opportunity to open to the public. Sometimes this is the hardest part, you know, because in our countries, yes, we have these embassies, but sometimes you feel like they are closed. I mean, you cannot enter if you do not have a specific motivation, like to, I don't know, renew your passport or ask for a visa. But in this way, we try to establish a connection between the social and civil society and the institution of another country. And it's something important. And it's something that diplomatic missions are trying to do very hard. And it's not easy because you have to adapt, for example, to different cultures. You have to know in a very good way the society. And it's, believe me, it's not so easy if you do not have a strong support in that country that can help you. And in some way, we try to do this, of course, giving a very important opportunity also to young people and young generations. So as I said, I've been asked to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the communication of diplomacy between countries and in particular public diplomacy. But first of all, I'd like to discuss what really diplomacy is. So I want you, if you can maybe just enter this link, you can do this, you can answer these questions so we can see what you think about diplomacy and what for you diplomacy mean. If you have a mobile phone, you can just scan the QR code and we can see live your answers. So we can see also if your answers are the same as mine. I give you 1 or 2 minutes. You can just also enter the link and insert the voting code. Your answers are coming. Just the first word that comes to your mind. win-win solution. Interesting. Spreading influence, transnational cooperation, the art of communication, globalization. Okay. Maybe at the end, we can also see all the other answers. And I will show you what, for me, now diplomacy means. Oh, a coming other. Amazing. Negotiation, of course. Okay. So I thought, well, what for me diplomacy mean? And I found this quote that in some way it's really interesting. You maybe know Henry Kissinger. Of course, you maybe studied him or you read some of his books. So he is a diplomat. He's still alive. And he had the great honor of working as Secretary of State and also Secretary of State for Nixon and for President Ford. So in the middle of the Cold War. And I started reasoning, so why he said this quote. So diplomacy, the art of restraining power. So in some way, I think that diplomacy had this power, power of containing power. So if we do not have diplomacy, can you imagine what would happen in the world? And in particular, when he said this phrase in that specific period where, you know, there were two blocks facing, two blocks of the world facing and always there to explode. So I think that diplomacy made possible for them to do not start a new war. And I think this what Henry Kissinger was trying to say. And also this word, what for me diplomacy is. And first of all, exchange. I think that if you work in the world of diplomacy, you have to exchange not just points of view, but also opinions, also your culture, your, in some way, your way of looking at things. And it is really important. And it's a quality that a diplomat needs to have. Then mutual understanding, I think, was also one of the answer that you gave during the poll. And the mutual understanding is essential. I mean, you're going to a foreign country, you're going to represent your country. And if you do not are open-minded, if you do not have this quality of understanding what is different for you, then that's not the job, the right job for you. And it's also important to know each other. I mean, every time I had to speak for an international conference or I had to go in another country, really different in particular from mine, from Italy, I always try to know where I was going and to understand also the culture. And I think this is very important because you're in some way putting yourself at disposal of the other and of their culture, and you're putting yourself in a way to understand what the others are doing and what they are doing. That I think this is really important also for diplomacy, and also to negotiate. You have to know the person you have in front of you in order to better, you know, obtain and to reach your goal. And this is of course related to the interests. You know, diplomacy means also interests, because if you're representing your country, you have of course to do the interests of your country, of course not affecting the others. Then I also decided to put war and peace, because for me diplomacy is the art of bringing peace in some way all over the world and spreading this peace. But without diplomacy, we can just have war. So I think that these are the two faces of the same thing. So it's something important to underline. So I also started thinking if also in the past, diplomacy and public diplomacy had to face some important challenges, such as COVID-19 pandemic is, of course. And I saw that after strong and very important events, of course, diplomacy had to adapt and had to change. For example, before the world wars, in particular, the first one, you can, I don't know if you're familiar with the international relations history, but diplomacy was just bilateral. So two countries meeting, or the most powerful countries meeting, for example, in Europe, and just discussing between themselves, and so and that's it. Then diplomacy was mainly secret. So there were secret treaties. So you have your secret foreign policy. There was not so much discussion on the field of diplomacy. And also, diplomats had this very big power because there were no such communication, instruments as we have today. So when you're a diplomat, when you were a diplomat at that time, you just had the power to sign treaties, to talk, of course, taking full powers as you were the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the representative, the Prime Minister of your country, because you do not have the time to call your ministry and ask him, okay, may I do this? You just had to decide. Now it's completely different. So after the World War, something changed. In particular, diplomacy from bilateral became multilateral. Why? Because we saw after the Second World War, in particular, this proliferation of international organizations such as the United Nations and more that give diplomacy a floor of discussion that became the basic for international and multilateral relations. Then the diplomacy was not secret anymore, was public, because there was this need of discussing in public between, yes, diplomats, but also trying to involve other experts, for example, in order to solve international crises, and not just starting a war, as you may know, was in some way easier in the past, in the 18th century, for example, to start wars. Well, after Second World War, the way of understanding and also thinking about diplomacy was really different. And also something that changed were the fields of action. So maybe in the past, diplomacy was more about war or peace or treaties about the borders. But now, and when the United Nations started operating, the fields of actions multiplicated. So we have, yes, peace, of course, is the basis of the international relations, but we have also economy. We have now, in particular, health, or we have human rights. So this changed a lot. So from this slide, I want you to take that diplomacy, it's really versatile. So diplomacy has this characteristic of change after, in particular, big impacts that can happen during the history. So this is really important. So the capacity of adapting to specific situation and the capacity to change and to apply this kind of change to the way of conduct diplomacy. So what happened during the time of COVID-19? This is a very important picture I decided to put. This is our former Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte. And we're now used to see these pictures, but this one was, I think, at the beginning of the pandemic, when it was not so normal to see the Prime Minister connected with the European Union. You can see the flags of the EU in the screen. And they were discussing about really important aspects, of course, of the cooperation during the time of COVID-19. And we were always used to see our Prime Minister going to Brussels with all the other member states, prime ministers, to discuss about very important topics. And at the beginning of the pandemic, this was not possible anymore. So it was a very big impact for everyone to see how also the institutions had to change the way of, applying their power and taking also decisions, but also of communicating with the public. And can you imagine how would have been different without the technology, the impact of COVID-19? I mean, also the way of communicating between the public and the institutions. I don't know in Indonesia, but in Italy, in particular at the beginning and also during all the pandemic, our institutions were used to give public speeches in order to update in some way the population on the situation and on, of course, the number of cases, on the rules, the measures. And this created a very, very strong link between institutions and population. And also this created the possibility of sharing the information in a very direct way, in a very effective way. So you do not have to wait for a long time for discover what will happen. So you have the possibility to be connected in a very direct way, and this was really important. Of course, this also conducted to sometimes some mistakes, because once you spread the information, you cannot stop that, and this is really important. And this is something that also came up during the pandemic: the communication ways of institutions, of diplomacy, of the public institutions, of course. And so what has really changed now after COVID-19, how this pandemic had an impact on the ways of conducting diplomacy and also on the ways of opening to the public. So first of all, the ways of communicating and meeting. I was saying this with the picture of our former prime minister. Can you imagine, the institutions were used to meet, we were used to meet diplomats, for example, for my job. Every day we had in-person meetings, and going specifically in offices, in embassies. So the impact of this pandemic was, I mean, there is no word to describe how this had a very strong impact on our work and our daily lives. So ways of communicating had to change. At the beginning, I think it was really hard in some way for everyone, in particular also at the institutional level, to understand how we could work in a very effective way without meeting in person. And this is something that it's still a challenge, because I think that, of course, we have to adapt, but sometimes if you have to negotiate, if you have to meet someone, of course, it's completely different to meet someone on a screen and to see him in person, to see his face or her face, his reactions. This is something that you cannot catch maybe from the screen. So it's something hard, but you have, of course, to adapt. So we had now this Zoom diplomacy. We use all these new instruments that can bring also to specific challenges. And then what has changed? Priorities. So the priority in particular now is maybe for diplomacy to share and to share inside the country you're serving, the work also of your country in order to beat COVID-19. So this is really important, because diplomacy now has this very important task of sharing in other countries the work that your country is doing in order to establish this cooperation. Because what we have understood, in particular also in Italy at the beginning and at the level of the European Union, is that you cannot beat this pandemic alone as a country. And at the beginning was hard to understand this also at the European level, but then when they established a very strong cooperation in order to elaborate a strategy to beat the virus, they understood that cooperation was essential. And in some way, Italy, as we were the first, experiencing very dramatic consequences of the virus, we became in some way a role model for other countries concerning the measures that they had to take. And the role of diplomacy in this way was really important, because diplomats started analyzing what Italy was doing in order to react to the virus, and they shared this information with the governments. And in some way, their governments can put in action these measures in order to also prevent the spread of the virus. And this was really important. So priorities change. Now the main topic is, of course, the COVID-19, but also how to continue doing in a very effective way the role of diplomacy, and in particular how to share the work of countries in other countries without meeting in person. Then also the fields of action changed. Now public diplomacy and diplomacy, has to be open to people in a very different way. In embassies and in international institution, they were used to organize maybe meeting in their embassies in person, And now they're going to focus more on the technology, also on the use of technology in the field of diplomacy. They are more focused on sharing also through their social media, for example, like Facebook, doing live, meetings. That, as also Mia said, it's really good because for public diplomacy you can involve more people. Sometimes it's hard, of course, because you cannot reach everyone. If maybe someone has internet connection that is not very good, you cannot reach those people. But of course, you can do a very positive impact on the civil society you're working with. And this brings also to the so-called hybrid diplomacy. So in some way, you have to create this, multiple connection with the public, with the audience. And was an example what Mia said during her presentation. I was one of the people connected from home during the Bali Democracy Forum last year. And they were in presence and there were speakers from home. And this was really good because in some way you can reach more people and also speakers that maybe were not able to fly to the other side of the world in order to participate. But in this way, you can involve more people, you have more speakers, and you have also high-level meetings because it's easier for someone that comes from, I don't know, the United States or from Italy to connect, just to open the computer, connect and speak to people in Asia or in other sides of the world. So this is a very good impact that this pandemic had on public diplomacy and on diplomacy. So this new situation, of course, brings some new challenges. And some of these are, yes, very positive, that maybe they are already handling. Others are not so positive. For example, the security threats. So it happens sometimes. I remember at the beginning, in particular, the pandemic, at the European level, there were the ministries having a very, very important meeting, of course, in private, because you cannot have this kind of discussions in public. And one student just managed to hack the system, and he went inside the meeting, the Zoom meeting, and he started like laughing, disturbing, and he was himself amazed of what he did. And this put the institutions in front of something that I think they didn't consider before. Well, the fact in some way to be spied by someone during the meetings, or the fact that someone can manage to enter and break the system. It's something that it's not so hard because you're just in an online world. So you cannot put people just in front of the door, to block anyone who wants to enter. So it's a very big challenge that everyone, not just at the institutional level, but also, of course, universities or conferences have to take care, because sometimes can create some issues and some very bad problems. Then new challenges are, for example, the people-to-people connectivity. This is something really important because now with this new way of conducting diplomacy, you can involve, as I said, more people, and you can also create a bigger and wider network of connections between people that can maybe be also useful for your future and your work. And this is really important. And I think it's a challenge that that can be accepted and in some way can be used to have very good results for improving the impact of public diplomacy. Then multiple stakeholders are now very important, aspects of diplomacy. In particular, maybe before the pandemic, diplomats were used to discuss with specific people about, I don't know, economic issues or cultural issues. Now they had to also interact with other kind of stakeholders, for example, medical services, in order to share and to start in their countries, to ensure in their countries medical, for example, instruments that were necessary in order to beat the pandemic. And this brings to the so-called global health diplomacy. So it's something really important now that maybe before embassies or diplomats never thought about, but now it's something central that will of course leave something important also for the future. Then what we understood and what diplomacy is trying to ensure is a coordinated response. So thanks to the work of diplomats, now the countries can have in some way coordinated responses to global issues such as, for example, now the COVID-19, in order to also build together a global strategy to handle the big problem that is affecting everyone, of course. Then the most, I think, clear challenge is the one of technology and the use of social media. Unfortunately, maybe there can be this gap between generations concerning technology and social media. For young people, now it's normal to stay connected, to follow lessons through the computer, or just to reach on the Twitter of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs what the ministry is doing. But it's not so normal for other part of people, other generations. It's quite hard. So diplomacy has also to handle this digital gap in order to reach all the categories of the society. So not just the ones who are used to use technology. And this is very important. And I think this is the biggest challenge. And we will see how the institutions will contribute in order to eliminate this gap that we can all see. And that's all. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm here for your questions, and also here are my contacts if you want to write me for something. I'm at your disposal. Terima kasih.
All right, very stunning. Thank you so much, Ms. Vanessa, for your insightful presentation. We will now have 10 minutes of Q&A session. Before that, I would like to ask everyone, if possible, please turn on your camera so that we can communicate more comfortable, because we can see your beautiful faces. Okay. So far we have one question in the chat box, Miss, and I would like to read it. Okay. This is from Alia from Indonesia Youth Foundation. The question is, as we know, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many activities have been changed from offline to online. In your opinion, what has decreased drastically due to the changes from offline to online public diplomacy? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting question, Alia. It's quite hard to say what has drastically decreased in this case, because I think what we can more see what has increased, that are the connections between the diplomacy and the public. So you can see on, for example, social media of embassies, on their websites, a lot of meetings, webinars. In some way, they are trying to reach in a more effective way the population, that maybe find a good solution. Because before, you just, if there was an event organized, for example, by the Embassy of Indonesia, you just had the chance to follow that, going to Rome and participating to the event. But if you're from a very far part of Italy, for example, you cannot do that. But now you can just turn on your video, you can just join the webinar, and you can discover more about the culture of Indonesia, for example, thanks to the embassy. I think that what is drastically decreasing is the personal contact with people, because you can just see people through a screen. It looks like the people you are meeting through a screen, but I mean, it's not the same. And I think that the most important part also in participating in such kind of events, for example, or the activities that the diplomacy try to organize, is also the informal part. So where you can go and talk with personally, with the diplomat, with the participants. You can create your network personally. You can exchange contacts, and this is quite impossible to do through a screen, because you can just stay there, and like we are doing here today, you can maybe ask a question, but it's not the same of going in presence and shake your hand to the ambassador and express your, I don't know, your concerns or your questions, your congratulations, whatever. It's a different way of connecting and of building relations. I think that's the aspect that is decreasing, unfortunately, the personal interaction, direct personal. I hope I answered your question.
All right, thank you, Ms. Vanessa. Actually, we have one more question. This is from Ciptadi Akbar Ahdiat from Ege University, Turkey. So the question is, what can we do as an individual or an organization to participate on palm oil discrimination by the EU to some countries such as Indonesia and Malaysia? How can we support our country? And do you think beside environment issue that EU said, do you think this is the Do you think this is their way to protect their sunflower or oil production and thinking palm oil production as a big competitor? Did you get my point, Miss Vanessa, or should I?
Yes. Perfect. I can also say this on the chat. Thank you very much for this question. It's a very tough question, but it's also a hot topic. I perfectly know for some Asian countries. And in particular, I've been discussing this with some diplomats from the Embassy of Indonesia in Rome, as they really care, of course, about the idea that the Italian people have about palm oil. There has been some campaigns inside the EU and some also regulations that are trying to, in some way, avoid the use of palm oil because some researchers in some way said that this is not healthy enough for the people. So here the role of diplomacy is in some way to spread the good knowledge about the topic. This is really important, I think, because it's quite easy now, as we have all this information coming, we are bombed by the information to listen, okay, palm oil, it's really bad. Then you start thinking why they say that. You maybe do some researches, you maybe find some fake news also on the topic. So here the role of institutions is really important, in particular the institution of the countries that are affected, because they need to start in some way a campaign in order to restore that particular, in this case, palm oil reputation in some way. It's not easy because you have to find some good arguments, of course, in order to support your cause. And I have to say that, for example, the embassies organize some very important events. Before we're in presence, now maybe online, with companies, for example, in order to share the importance of palm oil. And also the point is that is also how palm oil for the European Union, the point is how palm oil is produced. So the unsustainable way of producing palm oil, that's also a very important issue. And concerning the question about how young people can contribute in some way, well, it's something, I think there are a lot of possibilities. For example, now, as we have all these instruments, this technology, it's really easy for you, if you want to spread your voice, if you want to raise up your voice about a topic, to build a network, to connect with people from all over the world in order to organize, for example, an event where you bring some experts from your countries, that some scientists, for example, that can in some way explain your point of view. This is really important. I think that young people, if you believe really in this cause, you have to build a sort of bridge between people in order to spread what's your idea and what's the right idea for you. Just in this way, discussing, you can share the importance of this topic for you, and in some way also the solutions, because we know palm oil, for example, is a really important part of economy in your countries, in Malaysia or Indonesia. So we cannot just decide to eliminate this from our productions. And yes, of course, you need to raise up your voices. And I think that the youth has a lot of instruments now during this pandemic to build this connection. I hope I answered in some way your question, and I maybe give you some ideas of action.
Okay, Miss Vanessa, that was a very great answer. And we have one more question. So there is one person who raised his hand. He is Fauzi Wahyu Zamzami. So the floor is yours, Fauzi.
Okay, thank you so much, Mumur, for giving me an opportunity. Miss Vanessa, grazie per la presentazione. It's really interesting presentations that I ever heard. Actually, here I would like to ask about public diplomacy itself and your organizations, Global Action Italy. Here, what I would like to ask is about as I know that your organization's Global Action Italy is a really huge organization, and it's a nice organization because I saw that you have many relations like with some embassies which has the relations with Italy. But my question is how can your organizations survive in these COVID-19 situations, and also how Global Action Italy can contribute to Italian diplomacy? Thank you. Grazie.
Thank you very much for this amazing question, and also for your nice words about our work. Thank you very much. So, well, actually, this is something that we experienced because at the beginning of the pandemic, can you imagine, we were used to have in one day something like 5 meetings in person with embassies, with young people, so in schools or in other institutions. So when the pandemic arrived, it was for us like a panic situation, because how can we continue working and doing our job? And was the same, we know, for everyone. And for a moment, we also thought, okay, maybe we can just stop for a moment and maybe just wait that the pandemic will finish and then we will start again with our work. But then we brainstormed and we understood, first of all, that we could never stop our mission and our international opportunities for students. So what we came up was that we had to adapt to the situation in some way. So what we did was to start contacting again all our partners, embassies. We work with 70 embassies in Italy. So can you imagine the huge work? We started contacting them and telling them that we were switching online. So Global Action was moving online and that we wanted their support for our new initiatives. So in some cases we had, of course, a very good answers. In other cases we saw that they were not so ready to switch online in some way because they were scared. Some embassies, also some countries are scared about security issues also, or the fact that you can be registered and put online. So we had to deal with some kind of issues and also perplexities from the institutions. But then we moved online, so we switched all our meetings through online platforms, and this was amazing, because what we saw was that we had a huge and a wider impact on young people. In particular, for example, during these last months, we developed two new international programs. And these programs are involving people from all over the countries of the world. One in particular is about ASEAN. So we involved all the ASEAN governments, embassies, and also your youth from the high school. And we saw that we could reach more and more people, because how hard it is to organize an event with people from all over the world in person. You need, of course, a lot of money, first of all, and you need very big support from institutions, and from also you have to organize all the technical aspects. But with this new technology, you can just organize the meeting, launch the call all over the world through your partners, and then you can start the program. And it's amazing because we had the chance, as I said, to reach something like 1,000 people all over the world through these new initiatives. And I think that we accepted the challenge of this pandemic, and we moved online, and we try to find the positive aspects of the pandemic in some way, and to create a more wider impact on young generations. So this is how we decided to work. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you so much for the answer, Miss Vanessa. Thank you everyone for the question. Due to our limited time, we apologize for some of the unanswered question. We can answer it maybe in the next session or in the last before we end this webinar. But we really hope that we can answer all the question. But we are so sorry that we cannot answer your question. Okay, so now we will have a short 20 minutes break for everyone to get some breath, maybe get some snacks for later. And we kindly ask everyone to remain in the Zoom meeting. Once again, we ask everyone to stay in the Zoom meeting. All right then, I'll see you soon.
Setiap saat, setiap waktu, keringat basahi tubuh. Ini saatnya ku tunggu. Hari ini ku buktikan, ku yakin aku kan menang. Hari ini ku dikenang, semua doaku panjatkan, sejarahku persembahkan. Terus fokus, satu titik, hanya itu, titik itu. Tetap fokus, kita kejar, lampaui batas. Terus fokus, satu titik, hanya itu, titik itu. Tetap fokus, kita kejar, dan raih bintang. Kalau menang berprestasi, kalau kalah jangan frustasi. Kalau menang solidaritas, kita dalam sportivitas. Kalau menang berprestasi, kalau kalah jangan frustasi. Kalau menang solidaritas, kita dalam sportivitas. Terus fokus, satu titik, hanya itu, titik itu. Tetap fokus, kita kejar, dan raih. Fokus, satu titik, hanya itu, titik itu. Tetap fokus, kita kejar. Terus fokus, satu titik, hanya itu, titik itu. Tetap fokus, kita kejar, dan raih bintang. Sulit bagiku menghadapi kamu, tapi ku takkan menyerah. Walau yang ku perjuangkan, beri bagiku menahan marahku, tapi ku akan lakukan bahkan lebih dari itu. Aku yang minta maaf walau kau yang salah. Aku kan menahan walau kau ingin pisah. Karena kamu penting, lebih penting dari semua yang ku punya. Jika kamu salah, aku akan lupakan. Walau belum tentu kau lakukan yang sama. Karena untukku kamu lebih penting dari ego. Beri bagiku menahan marahku, lebih dari itu. Aku yang minta maaf walau kau yang salah. Aku kan menahan walau kau ingin pisah. Karena kamu penting, lebih penting dari semua yang ku punya. Jika kamu salah, aku akan lupakan. Walau belum tentu kau lakukan yang sama. Karena untukku kamu lebih penting dari egoku. Aku yang minta maaf walau kau yang salah. Aku kan menahan walau kau ingin pisah. Karena kamu penting, lebih penting dari semua yang ku punya. Jika kamu salah, aku akan lupakan. Walau belum tentu kau lakukan yang sama. Karena untukku kamu lebih penting dari egoku.
You've got a hold of me, don't even know your power. I stand 100 feet, but I fall when I'm around you. Show me an open door, you go and slam it on me. I can't take anymore. I'm saying, baby, please have mercy on me. Take it easy on my heart, even though you don't mean to hurt me. You keep tearing me apart. Please have mercy, mercy on my heart. Please have mercy, mercy on my heart. I drive through the night just to be near you, baby. Heart open, testify. Tell me that I'm not crazy. I'm not asking for a lot, just that you're honest with me. My pride, all I got. I'm saying, baby, please have mercy on me. Take it easy on my heart, even though you don't mean to hurt me. You keep tearing me apart. Please have mercy on me. I'm a puppet on your strings, and even though you got good intentions, I need you to set me free. Would you please have mercy, mercy on my heart? Would you please have mercy, mercy on my heart? Consuming all the air inside my lungs, ripping all the skin from off my bones. I'm prepared to sacrifice my life, I would gladly do it twice. Consuming all the air inside my lungs, ripping all the skin from off my bones. I'm prepared to sacrifice my life, I would gladly do it twice. Oh, please have mercy on me. Take it easy on my heart, even though you don't mean to hurt me. You keep tearing me apart. Would you please have mercy on me? I'm a puppet on your string, and even though you got good intentions, I need you to 쉬고 두려움에 맞설 때 내게 들려온 한마디 조금 더 힘을 내라고 안개 속에 가려져 한 줄기 빛도 없이 고민하고 또 고민했었어 오늘의 나를 위해서 남과 다른 시선에 또다시 비춰지는 그런 날들에 반대로 나를 일으켜 달려나가 지금부터 시작해봐 앞을 달려 Running running 세상에 소리쳐 막다른 길이 나타나도 난 괜찮아 지금부터 시작해봐 앞을 달려 Running running 너와 함께라면 모든 날 속에서 끝없이 달려봐 거친 세상 속 삶이 나를 누르고 점점 버거워질 때 내게 건네온 그 손길 한 번 더 일어나라고 때론 울기도 하고 때론 소리치지만 내겐 절대로 지울 수 없는 나만의 중심 위에서 남과 다른 시선에 또다시 비춰지는 그런 날들에 반대로 나를 일으켜 달려나가 지금부터 시작해봐 앞을 달려 Running running 세상에 소리쳐 막다른 길이 나타나도 난 괜찮아 지금부터 시작해봐 앞을 달려 Running running 너와 함께라면 모든 날 속에서 끝없이 달려봐 거친 세상 속 서로에게 빛이 되는 간절했던 꿈아마 지긋했던 밤하늘도 또 한 번 이겨내면 돼 달려나가 Can be the one I want I love myself 잃어버린 나를 다시 찾을 거야 Running running 너와 함께라면 모든 날 속에서 바라는 곳에 닿을 그날을
Hello everyone. Welcome back to the International Youth Forum on Public Diplomacy issue. I hope the break was enough to recharge your energy. Now, without further ado, I will hand it back to Miss Rain.
Alrighty, thank you very much to Ms. Moore. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our second session of today. We hope you had a pleasant break and you are ready to enter our second session. In the session, we'll be hearing from another expert speaker, and the second topic of discussion is the relationship between developing and developed countries in carrying out public diplomacy amidst the global crisis. Prior to COVID-19, the gap between developed and developing nations was already prevalent as it is. However, ever since the pandemic hit, we have seen numerous nations undergo struggles on societal levels. This creates an increasing importance of public diplomacy between nations to ensure there is strengthened cooperation to bridge the relationships between developing and developed nations. This relationship is a crucial one to be maintained as the pandemic has affected all facets of international cooperation, and there must be a global collaboration in order to strengthen the status quo. In this section, our second expert speaker, Mr. Radityo Dharmaputra, will be speaking to us about the methods of public diplomacy between developing and developed countries during the COVID-19 pandemic. Radityo Dharmaputra is currently a lecturer at the Department of International Relations at the University of Airlangga. He also earned his bachelor's and master's degree in international relations. He continued to make his PhD in political science from the Johan Skytte Institute of Political Studies in the University of Tartu in Estonia. Aside from his impressive educational background, Mr. Radityo also has an extensive list of research and publications, one of which was in 2018 admitted to the Taiwan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, titled In the Shadow of OD China, Understanding Russo equals Taiwan Relationship After the Russian Pivot to Asia in 2012. Last year, Mr. Radityo served as a Vice Director II, Directorate of Research, and studied for the Overseas Indonesian Student Association Alliance, or PPI. Before I welcome our speaker, I would like to remind the audience once again that you will be allowed to ask questions to Mr. Radityo. This can be done either by typing the question in the chat box or by using the raise hand feature during the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question directly to our speaker, please don't hesitate to use the raise hand feature in the Zoom call and we will open the floor to your question. And now, please join me in welcoming our second speaker of the day, the Honorable Mr. Radityo Dharmaputra. Mr. Radityo, you may have the floor. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Raini. And allow me to say thank you so much to the organizer, to the Indonesian Youth Foundation, for inviting me to this session. As the third speaker, probably the last one, in this session, I would like to share my thoughts on public diplomacy and how different countries not only trying to collaborate, but trying to undermine, to be honest, to undermine other countries' efforts to combat the pandemic, especially in the context of public diplomacy. If I can share my screen, let me see. Okay, I hope you can see the screen already. So in this presentation, I would like to have a comparative survey between. Okay, I do not like the word the developing countries because it's well, it's kind of misleading because some of the countries, especially in developed countries, try to use public diplomacy in a different way. So let me just use a different words when I came to that subject. But in this particular issues, public diplomacy in times of crisis, I would like to try to first look at how we define public diplomacy. Both the previous speakers already, to an extensive extent, tried to define that, but I would like to start by just saying that there are two ways of looking at public diplomacy. So either you use traditional meaning. In this sense, traditional meaning means the way countries are trying to communicate with the foreign publics, trying to influence their attitudes, at the same time also trying to achieve national interest. This is also very important for countries because diplomacy in the end is a tool for countries to achieve their national interest. But at the same time, especially in the last 10, 20 years, there are this kind of new meanings that both previous speaker already mentioned, this kind of new meaning of public diplomacy becoming more targeted towards understanding, fostering understanding between each others, not only between states, but also peoples. Also this idea that public diplomacy no longer stays as a tool, but act as a fluid environment for engagement between, again, between countries, NGOs, business, corporations, peoples, but also the idea that it no longer focused on achieving each country's national interest, but it is a system of mutually beneficial relations. So in this sense, public diplomacy is not targeted towards one country, but it tries to create this global kind of awareness and try to achieve global target. Moving on from that, so just keep in mind that there are two ways of trying to understand public diplomacy. In 2016, I wrote an article on nation branding. That's why I tried to bring the concept here, because I think probably most of you will already know about soft power. And I think Ms. Mia already explained about that as well, that soft power is kind of trying to attract others, so affecting others by attraction, not by coercion, not by economic means, not by military means, but by attraction. In attractions, in this case, is usually considered as cultural assets. So you can see how Hollywood or Bollywood in India, Hollywood in the US, now K-pop in Korea, they try to use that to attract others, us, for example, to understand their way of thinking. But it can also be political ideals, democracy, or on the other hand, authoritarianism, and also policies, which is my focus in the next few minutes. But there is also this idea, a complementary concept to soft power and public diplomacy that are emerging since 2007, 2010. It's called nation branding, how you construct an image of your country. And then, as probably you already noticed, that the word branding means selling and marketing a country's brand. That's the usual way of thinking about nation branding. I would propose a different way of thinking about these three concepts. So it is kind of an interlinked understanding. So on the one hand, you have soft power as a resources. You have your cultural assets, you have your political system, you have your political ideas as a resources. Based on that resources, you want to try to build the brand. So how countries want to be seen, how it want to be perceived by other countries, by peoples from other countries. And public diplomacy, in my understanding and my proposed understanding here, is how you achieve that image, how you can achieve that brand. So it can be done through digital diplomacy, like Ms. Mia already mentioned before. It can be done through other means, more traditional public diplomacy, such as, here in this instance, several other examples of public diplomacy. So you have pop culture, you have institutes, cultural exchange institutes in many countries. You have Confucius Institutes in Indonesia, and in other countries, China's Confucius Institute. You have British Council in many countries as well. You have German Institute in many countries. That's one way to think about public diplomacy. Also, the use of language and diaspora in other countries to promote your nation's brand. You can use media, global broadcasting media. Many big countries especially use this. The US, many European countries. China is now trying to use the same method as well. Russia used the same methods. India, to some extent, weirdly do not use. I don't know if anyone can actually think about Indian news network that you can watch in Indonesia. I cannot think of one. But other countries have tried to use this. Also, celebrity-driven diplomacy, youth exchange. Many countries use gastro diplomacy, including Indonesia. So that can be coffee or, sushi or other. Indonesia might promote instant noodles or beef rendang, for example. Also global events. So you can have the World Cup, you can have Olympics in Tokyo, scheduled for last year, rescheduled for this year. Who knows if it will happen anyway, but that's one way to promote your country. And then other opportunities as well, economic assistance, helping other countries. with economic benefit. But the pandemic has changed a lot of things. I'm not going to delve into this too much because other speaker already mentioned it accelerated global power shift from Europe to Asia. It shows that many Asian countries can control the pandemic better than the one in Europe. I'm currently in Estonia, and I think we are the worst country right now for the last 2-3 weeks, are the worst country in the world in terms of COVID-19 infection. So being a big country in Europe or in the US, in the Western Hemisphere, doesn't really connect with the idea of power shift. Now, South Korea is even better than the one in Europe. Target audiences changes. Also, it's not only the diplomats, but now it's the young people, the regular people, the public, regular public wanting an information about the pandemic. So that's changing target audience. At the same time, you have polarization. You have political polarization caused by the pandemics. You can rate what happened in the US right now. The rising attacks on Asian American, for example. That's one way to look at how the pandemic changed. So, and then digital technology. We are now talking over Zoom. So, and diplomatic meeting now conducted over Zoom. So that's one way of looking at how things have changed. Actors already changed in the last 10, 20 years again, but now new actors emerge. Pharmaceutical companies now became one of the important actors of diplomacy. There are several diplomatic chaos in Europe right now because AstraZeneca and the EU has a different understanding about their agreement. So now the EU has problems with the vaccine. So AstraZeneca became a very important actor. At the same time, it drives people apart. So you know that, again, you can't meet regularly with people. At the same time, you are fed with this kind of information, the narrative about the pandemic that might or might not be true. So in the sense that I will come back to this later, the pandemic public diplomacy is important. Bear in mind that there are 5 important aspects of pandemic public diplomacy: substance, information, trust, collaboration, and mutual benefit. That's the idea that to have a good public diplomacy in a pandemic era, you have to have the substance, that you are successful. So to build your brand and to export the idea that you are successful, you have to have a good kind of information system. So you have to be open, you have to gain the trust of others, you have to collaborate, like as Raini mentioned in the introduction, that countries, developing countries have to collaborate in this kind of public diplomacy in the pandemic era. And it has to target the mutual benefit, no longer each state's interest. That's the idea. What actually happened? What happened is that big countries, I will use the term big countries and like rather smaller countries instead of developing, because to some extent, small countries are developed. Singapore, South Korea, even here in Estonia, very small countries, kind of developed countries. Whereas big countries like China, Russia, Indonesia, India, you can tackle them as a more developing countries. I would say that each country, instead of focusing on collaboration, they're focusing on each their own interests. And big countries have the ability to use a resource-based diplomacy, or some people might call it a propaganda. What I mean by that, by propaganda or by resource-based diplomacy, is you can look at the 2 countries. I will use 2 countries as the example here. China and Russia, big countries, resources to do a lot of things compared to smaller countries. The idea here is to change the narrative. So China in the early days of the pandemic is portrayed as this kind of the evil, the cause of what happened. The pandemic came from China. So they have to change the narrative. What did they do? They tried to externalizing the blame. They tried to declaring success or victory. Is that true? That's a completely different subject of a discussion. But the idea is that to declare victory and success, whether that's true or not, but you are trying to export the narrative, the notion, the idea that you are successful. To build on that is to have a good public diplomacy in terms of very resource-based. So you send masks to other countries, you send health equipment to other countries, you send vaccine to other countries. Both of China and Russia do that. For Russia, they have this idea from Russia with love. If you know the term, it's kind of this kind of mass diplomacy, health diplomacy from Russia to European countries, to a richer European countries like Italy. In the beginning of the pandemic, Russia tried to export to help Italy using mass diplomacy. Russia also have this Sputnik vaccine, not yet accepted in Europe or the US, but already accepted in other countries. I think around 50 countries in the world now. So both of them use the same message that we are now the good guys, we are successful in containing the pandemic, we are helping other countries. And not only that they're saying that, they're also, or they're doing that, they're using in the Russian case, it's Twitter diplomacy, like Ms. Mia mentioned before. So the Russian diplomats will use Twitter to, in a one-way layer. So it's not like a dialogue between Russian diplomats and the public in Twitter. It's kind of information from the Russian side to tell the story about the Sputnik vaccine, to tell a story about the success in Russia in containing the deaths, and so on. So China also used the same campaign. In Europe, there are discussions about China disinformation campaign, that China tried to negate the efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine, for example, and tried to ask people to use Chinese vaccine instead. I think that happens in Indonesia now. The discussion about the AstraZeneca and Sinovac is kind of one way to see that there are this kind of disinformation campaign. On the other hand, you have small countries that they cannot use an extensive resource-based mass diplomacy or health equipment diplomacy. They're using digital-based diplomacy. They're using ideas. South Korea is one of the success story. In the early days, they have mass diplomacy to other countries because they can contain the pandemic. But at one point, it stopped because the resources are not there. They cannot continue to help other countries using masks anymore. Again, because they're not as big as China or Russia. Economically, economically they're better than Russia. But in terms of the idea, they are trying to use a different kind of public diplomacy. They're trying to promote the idea of corona diplomacy. If you know the 3T, the test, trace, and treat, that came from South Korean experience. The openness and transparency regarding the data about the COVID-19, again, that came from the South Korean experience in the early days of the pandemic last year. And it was praised by the media during that time. Even until now, South Korea was regarded as the success story. Even though when you ask South Koreans or you ask your friends in South Korea, that can actually change. They can tell you what indeed happened in South Korea. It might be very different from the notion that you got from the media. Again, because it is domestic oriented. But that's how South Korea tried to use their Twitter account of the diplomats, their the one I know is from Facebook account, again Instagram account. They're trying to promote the idea that South Korea is successful and that South Korea has this idea of corona diplomacy. On the other hand, my place right now, Estonia, also try to brand Estonia as this e-government and digital technology. So you will think that they have a success story in containing COVID using digital technology. That is exactly what the government tried to promote. Not only the government, the people, Estonian diaspora abroad, trying to promote the same thing. Using the tracing application, for example. It is an application that can detect if your neighbors, your friends, your close person close to you, physically close to you, has COVID or not. It was branded as this kind of public-private partnership. So it's not government, but it's also the corporation in Estonia, civil society, academics try to build this kind of tracing application. They try to sell it to the other European countries and to the world, because they say that the same application in South Korea, in Taiwan, and Singapore is intruding your privacy because the government now has your data. In the Estonian application, the government do not have your data. They only have your, you are the one that actually in charge of it. But it failed, miserably failed. Not many people use that in Estonia. I tried to use that, it doesn't really work, because for it to work, people have to be aware that they have the application, that they have to submit data, that they are, or they have COVID-19, so that the system knows that they have. Because the government doesn't have the data. So it must be the citizens, or maybe the user of the application. It failed. So because it failed, they could not promote it any longer. So the brand of Estonia as this kind of e-Estonia, e-resident, so you can connect with Estonia without staying here. It was the pre-pandemic. After the pandemic, now people start having doubt. Can Estonia actually do that? Because they failed miserably in this kind of tracing application. So what I'm trying to say here is that my final remarks here is that you cannot construct reputation or image. It can only be earned, said Simon Anhalt. So when you're trying to build your image, it cannot be based on a fake news, or you cannot just use the media to portray something else. If you failed in your COVID, in managing your pandemic, you cannot portray the idea that you are successful. It cannot be done in the current situation regarding public diplomacy. Previously, without the advance in digital technology, maybe you can do that. You can, the diplomat can twist the words because you are dependent on them for your information. Now you cannot do that. So what I mean here is that to have a good public diplomacy, either as a person, as an NGO, as a corporation, or as a country, you have to have a good track records. If you are trying to portray yourself as a democratic country, then you have to be a democratic country. You cannot just use the media to portray that you are a democratic country. Some countries use their media to portray to the foreign publics that they are a democratic country, that there are elections there, or they can, but at the same time, you know from other sources that it is not true, that the government oppressed the people. So it cannot be constructed track record matters, and the important thing is that the country internal public are another country's external public. What I mean here is that you are a citizen of Indonesia, for example, or you are a citizen of Estonia, you are a citizen of China. But in the sense, you are also a target for other countries' public diplomacy, right? So if, for example, in a conflict between China and the US right now, US or American public are the target of Chinese public diplomacy. Or in the sense of vaccine, Indonesian public are the target of Chinese public diplomacy, that Chinese vaccines are better than the other vaccine. So as a public, you have to have an open information. You have to learn to sort the information in your news box, or you probably not news box anymore right now, probably in your Instagram, your Twitter account. You have to be able to know that you are being targeted by other countries' diplomacy. Is this a bad thing or a good thing? It doesn't really matter, because as long as you are aware, then you know you have to be ready for any kind of information, especially since the idea is that to have an open information. The idea is to have open information as that can inspire trust and confidence in that country or in diplomacy. But the problem here is that, as I've showed you before, countries usually do not think about the common good. They are thinking about their own interests. In that sense, information becomes a tool or a weapon. If information became a tool and a weapon, then you have to be able to, at least at first, understand that it might be used as a tool. Well, the idea is to help other countries, right? My last point here, that the idea is you should lend your neighbor your garden hose if his house was on fire. The idea is not to have the fire spread to your house. But in reality, most countries will try to protect their own countries first before trying to help others. And that's understandable. Vaccine is a perfect example that other countries are trying to keep the vaccine for their own citizens first before helping other countries. So in that sense, I'm not trying to say that public diplomacy is no longer important, but I'm trying to say that you have to be very careful, especially in the pandemic, that most countries will use public diplomacy not to advance a common good, but it is very possible that they are just trying to build their own image. They are trying to, again, use public diplomacy as a tool for the national interest. So this is just another way to look at public diplomacy. I'm not going to talk about youth exchange, about the other country, because that's already been done in the previous section, but I'm trying to raise your awareness that all those good things about public diplomacy can also be used in a very traditional way of achieving nations' interest. And in that sense, you have to be aware that you might be the target. And you can also switch the table and try to use it for your own, but I think we can discuss it later if we still have the time. I will stop at that, and probably we still have time for discussions and comments, and welcome any other thoughts on this matter. Thank you so much. I will return the microphone to Raini as the moderator.
Okay, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation and the great insights that you have given us. To summarize Mr. Adityo's presentation, he began by defining public diplomacy, differentiating between traditional meanings and new meanings that have evolved over time. the ways that public diplomacy is used comes in a number of different forms. The first of which is pop culture, cultural exchange, language and diaspora, global broadcasting media, youth and academic exchange, so on and so forth. The pandemic itself has changed the way public diplomacy is conducted between countries because it has created exhilarating power shifts, changes the target audience of public diplomacy. Domestic and identity crisis and polarization has increased with the presence of the COVID-19 pandemic, importance of digital technology, the emergence of many new actors, and the driving of societies, pulling them apart slightly due to the digitalized means of communication and socialization. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of important points have been brought up in terms of conducting public diplomacy during this pandemic, such as substance and collaboration among countries, as well as the importance of the role of the public, where we have to recognize that we are targeted by these countries with their public diplomacy, noting that they have their own self-interest. And bearing this in mind, their information can also be weaponized. So we must always be conscious of the information that is given to us. The contrast between big countries and small countries also differ in the ways that they use public diplomacy. Big countries tend to use resource-based diplomacy, with the example of China and Russia using mask diplomacy to switch the narratives of national image at the start of the pandemic. And for small countries, there's the example of South Korea with their test, trace, and treat campaign and the promotion of openness, transparency, and democracy in media, which contrasts to Estonia's approach to public diplomacy with their e-technology approach, which was a public-private partnership, but however raised concerns about privacy among the public. And to close off with the summary, Mr. Radityo gave us a quote, which I believe is very interesting, which is, reputation cannot be constructed, but it can only be earned. So I believe that does not only apply to national level states that are that big, it also applies to us personally. So I believe that's something important to note as well. So now we will move to our question and answer session. So first we will begin with the questions in the chat box, but if anybody would like to ask a question to our speaker directly, please feel free to use the raise hand option and we will open the floor to your question. So I will just have a look at the chat box if there are any questions. All right, so we have a question from Miss Emira. But yes, you can speak directly to the speaker. The floor is yours.
Hello, Kak Radityo. My name is Emira. I'm from the Indonesian Youth Foundation. I'd like to say first that I extremely enjoyed your presentation. It was very insightful, and your way of presenting with the changing colors and the moving image was very unique. Now, my question is, the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly shown, I guess I would say, a different side of a lot of countries, powerful ones, in fact. For example, there was one article that was published last year that stated that the US and the UK were one of the most prepared countries to face this pandemic, whereas smaller countries such as Thailand or Vietnam is predicted to be the opposite. And yet the facts have shown otherwise. Now, in your opinion, will this change the overall international community perception of these countries? And do you think that once this pandemic is over, this image will remain, or will the first world country will once again take over the public image of power and capability? Thank you, Kak.
So can I answer the question, Laini?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Emira, I think. Yeah. Thank you so much for the compliment and for the question. Very interesting question. Let me start by saying that the UK and the US image as this kind of leaders and the success story, or the most prepared nation, was based on the pre-pandemic situation, right? So they have a good health system, or in the case of the UK. In the US, it mostly based on US ability or their economic ability, their size, and their technology. But I think there are this kind of I think in the middle of the pandemic last year, we have this discussion whether democracy is more prepared to tackle the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the moment, it seems like many problems in a big country and in democracy force them to be the bad story here. Not only in the US or in the UK, but also in the EU, in Indonesia, if you can see, where the idea of, let's say, anti-vaccine has been very much, very powerful. At the same time, you have other countries which is a more authoritarian in nature. They have, in the case of Vietnam, is even more a very kind of like a one-party system, but they are the success story in this pandemic. Now the question is whether they use public diplomacy to enhance their image. Vietnam already done that. In the sense of pandemic, Vietnam, South Korea, Singapore is well, Singapore to some extent were the success story. So the US and the UK were not. But your question is whether in the future they will stay as this kind of powerful countries. It is kind of very difficult question. I would say that because we don't know when the pandemic will end, and as long as they can produce the idea, the narrative that they are the success story, they can still contain the pandemic in their own countries, and they can show the world that they can manage the pandemic. They have the potential. Probably not Thailand, because they have, again, the country's image is not only based on the pandemic, of course. They also have to be based on, as I said before, their image or their brand based on their soft power. The UK and the US have one that, not Vietnam, that Vietnam, maybe South Korea, Thailand, that they didn't have democracy. That's a very powerful message, because yes, they might have some troubles, but as long as they can change the way they do things, and the UK is very successful in this case, they change the treatment, they change how they manage the pandemic, and now the UK is one of the success stories, especially in the case of vaccination. So they have, I think, one of the highest level of vaccination in the world right now. Well, Israel is the first, and then you have other countries, and the UK, compared to the other democratic and Western countries, they have a very high rate of vaccination. So that's one thing. One thing that Vietnam or Thailand or Singapore or South Korea, the one in Asia, can do is to build their image based on the pandemic, their success story. But they will have problems when, again, the pandemic ends, and then there are questions about the attractiveness of their system. Whether other countries will say, maybe we can follow their models, but they are undemocratic. Can we still use them? That would be a question. It's the same with China. Many people already mentioned that China is successful because they are very strong state. They have a very strong state. They have one-party system, so they can move very quick to build hospitals and things. Yes, that's during the time of the pandemic. But after that, then you have the problem of convincing people to attract people to your ideas. And which ideas is that? Because the pandemic is over. So by that time, they have to think about other image. But until that time came, and we don't know when the pandemic will end, they will have a very strong position.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. So before we continue, are there any other questions from the audience? If anybody would like to ask a question. If not, I could just ask my own question because I have one in particular. But of course, this isn't about me. So if anybody else has a question, please do ask. All right. In the meantime, I
Your
could just
question
ask
will
my
be
question. Yes. So earlier you mentioned that there needs to be a level of digital literacy from the public in order for them to be able to take in information that is useful to them and not be a victim of the weaponized information spreading that is used by states that you said earlier. So my question is, in what ways would you recommend that the general public take in information? So what would you recommend, which strategies would you recommend that the general public use to make sure that the information they are receiving is correct, is transparent, and is accountable?
very difficult. Very difficult question. Why is it very difficult? Because in even in more developed countries, in Europe or in the US, for example, you have the same problem. Publics that can be deceived or can be confused by the very diverse information that they can access. One way to tackle that problem is to go back to the idea of having an education or having, well, that would be very normative, right? Having a good education system, but it can be done. It cannot be done in a quick way. So what can we do in a very short term? One way is to have a discussion like this. Especially it's the role of the young organization or youth organization in that sense, to have a talk, a discussion regarding the very sensitive or very controversial issue of the day. For example, the vaccine. Again, I mean, in Indonesia right now, if you follow the story, there is this idea, there is this discussion about the AstraZeneca and the Sinovac vaccine. Again, whether the one vaccine have this kind of pig strain in it or something like that, and then you have this discussion about the halal or the situation or the context of the, how do you call that in English, halalness, something like whether the vaccine is halal or can it be used. Again, I think that's part of this kind of discourse in the society that can be mitigated by, again, having discussion, listening to the other more expert analysis, listen to your doctors, not your, again, not the people that are not an expert in that subject. So if it's vaccine, then listen to your health experts. But it is very difficult in a very polarized situation, political polarization in many countries in the world. Even here in Estonia, you have a diverse news from the government, from the other media, from Russian media as well. And then it tries to challenge each other. And then the people just say, okay, I don't know what's true, and so I don't want to listen. That's the problem. And if it happened to the older people, then yes, it's a problem, but you can solve it by talking to them, the young people. But if it happened to the young people, then again, I have no answer for that. It's the same thing that we have to deal in all countries, and maybe cooperation between countries, maybe discussion, maybe collaboration between youth organization cross countries. That will help to some extent again. But I'm quite pessimistic that it will happen in the next few months or years, or even years. So that's a challenge, and I don't know if the other participants have an answer to that. but I do not see the way out at the moment. So it's kind of very difficult. Even if I say that you have to trust the government, sometimes the government have their own agenda. Again, it might be good, might not be good. In many cases, you have the government trying to push their own agenda instead of the people's well-being. So that's another problem. So yeah, sorry, it doesn't really answer your question, but I just say that it's kind of very difficult time that we live in, and the only way we can do is we can, maybe the only thing that we can do is just stop by talking to each other.
All right, thank you for that. I'm sorry for the difficult question, by the way. I realized that personally there's this dilemma, I guess, that kind of came up with the digital era, because we do have this endless accessibility to information, and it's all super easy to access. And so with that, there's also an increase of misinformation. So it kind of creates like this dilemma in society, like, is the information you're taking incorrect? How do we fact check that? It's all become like blurry. That was sort of like the context that I had for the question. But of course, obviously, no, continue.
I can just one short comment.
Yes.
Again, returning back to education. I think the problem with our education system is that we are not trained to think. Instead, we are trained to receive information, as much as we can, but we are not trained to think. So when you receive information, you are not trained to think whether it's true or not. You just receive it. Oh, it's from my brother, it's from my father, so it must be true. So that's the problem. I was so upset about this is just my personal, again, related to public diplomacy, the latest issue on the Indonesian badminton team in All England. That was such a big deal in Indonesia, even in Europe. It caused a chaotic or a diplomatic chaos. Even the UK ambassador had to comment. The Indonesian ambassador in the UK has to comment on that. And it was based on, again, the unwillingness of people to actually read what happened and to try to find out what happened before commenting, before saying things. So it's a perfect example of information lead to blind nationalism and lead to comments that, again, drive people apart. So, and then you have to try to engage in a very very targeted public diplomacy. If you read the UK's ambassador message to the Indonesian people in Facebook and Twitter, in Instagram, they are trying very hard so that Indonesians try to research the incident, to find what actually happened. But I don't know, it repeats itself in many cases. And that's not really good for our image. Again, if you are young people, you're trying to portray Indonesia as a good country, as this kind of vibrant young countries that will be a big country in the next 20 years. You cannot attack other countries' Instagram account or Twitter just based on your limited knowledge of the situation. But that's what happened, right?
Yes, definitely agree with that. I'm sorry for turning this to a sort of open discussion between the moderator and the speaker, but now, unfortunately, the time for the question and answer has elapsed. So I think it's time now to switch back to our Master of Ceremony. So thank you very much for everybody who asked a question, and thank you very much to Mr. Adityo for the answers and the wonderful insights, and also for the great presentation from earlier. And so now, for the closing of today's event, I will be heading back to our MC. You may have the floor.
Thank you so much. I would like to express my appreciation for all the expert speakers that have attended and shared their insight in the seminar. We certainly enjoy all the presentation. Moreover, I would like to thank everyone who has attended and stayed until the end of the meeting. If you check the chat box, you will find a link to a Google form. Please fill the form truly. This will be the ticket to claim your e-certificate, which will be sent in a few days. You may fill the form now for 15 minutes. All right. You have 15 minutes to fill out the form. In the meantime, I would like to ask some of you, and we can have a conversation about this seminar. Okay, wait, I will check the participant list. Oh, no, I think I can ask our project leader, Miss Emira. So what was your favorite new information that you obtained from the seminar, Miss Emira?
Oh my God, there's a lot to say, all of them. But I think I'm just gonna start from the very basic thing, is the different approaches to the definition of what public diplomacy is. Because, you know, if you look it up on Google, like define public diplomacy, they will easily tell you what it means, right? But like the definition, like the word by word definition and the actual meaning and, you know, the essential of public diplomacy is very different, I guess, because based on what I searched weeks ago when I was preparing this event, is that public diplomacy was, you know, like basically just how a nation sells their image to the international community in order to up their, I don't know, I guess the everyday world is like their popularity or whatever, right? And like, yeah, it's just that like hearing all these brilliant individuals saying their personal approach to the meaning of public diplomacy, I think is very interesting. It definitely gives me a more broad insight of it. And yeah, I find that really interesting. And there, I mean, there are various more, but I guess that's some things that I definitely learned today. And
all right, yeah, that's very, the presentation was very great. I think so. Okay. All right, I will ask the another person. So I think I want to hear the opinion from Mr. Oseh John. Are you there?
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for a wonderful event. I think the event was very, very successful, and it was good because they give us chance in order to express our questions in which they return to answer us. It's very educative anyway.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. John, for attending this seminar. We are very grateful to have you here.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm very, very grateful.
Okay, all right. And then I want to hear also from the participant that came from Philippines, Mr. Ron Olvido.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello semuanya.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Bisa?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay. I just want to say thank you for this very informative seminar about public diplomacy, because like for example, for youth, when you say diplomacy, it's like talking about ambassadors, talking about policies, something like that. Like I think as a youth, it's a big responsibility for us, like very stressful to tackle. But I think the speakers make it easy for us to understand what public diplomacy is. Like, for example, right now, us talking to each other from different countries is already considered as public diplomacy. So it's like, even though we do have different policies to each other, different ideas, we meet halfway. And then the contribution of that event is for all. So I just want to say thank you for the organizer, to everyone. It's a very informative, and I am really looking forward for more event in terms of this kind of topic. So that's all. Terima kasih banyak po.
Thank you. Sama-sama.
Terima kasih.
Nice to meet you, Ron.
Ay. Senang
Alright.
bertemu semuanya juga.
Okay, I think we have one participant from Pakistan. Are you there, Sohaib?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm standing in a noisy place. Sorry for that.
It's okay. Mhm.
Okay. From today's session, I have learned a lot regarding public diplomacy, and this session was very new for me. And I am really happy that you have given me opportunity to speak. Thank you so much.
Welcome. We also thank you. You attend the session till the end, so we are very grateful for that. We still have around 5 minutes to fill the form. So for those of you who haven't filled the form yet, so you can fill the form right now. And now I want to ask another person. Mr. Chiptari Akbar, would you like to share your opinion?
Hi,
Mr.
can you hear
Yeah.
me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I think I have trouble connections.
We can hear you properly.
All right. Sorry, my connection is not stable. Okay. How about now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Actually, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the speakers. Start from Miss Anak Agung, from Miss Vanessa Boy, and also from Mr. Mr. Dharma. I thank you so much for coming as a big honorable to discuss with you together as beautiful presentations for today, and also for all of the foreigners as IYF representations. I want to say thank you so much for attend our event, and I hope we can collaborate. We can make better events in the near future. That's all for me. Thank you for
All right.
the opportunity.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Akbar. I would like to ask one more person. So, Miss Tiffany, are you there? Tiffany. Oh, okay. She has a problem with her microphone. All right, then. I think most of you have already done with filling out the form. And I assume that everyone have filled the form. And now before we move on to the photo session, I would like to inform everyone once more that the debate showcase has unfortunately been cancelled due to a limited time and resources. However, participants that took part in the debate competition will still receive their benefits. We sincerely apologize for this inconvenience. Okay, with that being said, may I ask everyone to open their camera for documentation? All right, everyone, please turn on your camera because we will take a photo session. If possible, yeah. If you are in the proper place or yeah, you can turn on your camera. I will wait for another people to turn on their camera. Okay. Nice. I can see your beautiful faces over here. All right. Okay. Miss Nabila, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you do the honor?
Sorry?
Would you take a picture of us?
Okay, I can.
Okay, thank you.
One. Okay, right now?
Yeah.
1,
Okay.
2, 3. Again. Okay. 1, 2. One, 2, 3. Can done.
Okay, thank you, Miss Nabila. Once more, I would like to say thank you for everyone for attending our seminar. I hope you gain a very interesting and beneficial topic and information. And now you may leave the meeting, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you. See you.
Terima kasih banyak.
Yuk, terima kasih banyak teman-teman. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You may leave the room.
Skies shining away so blue in this paradise. The wind blows away your blues and bruise. No, you won't be alone right on this night of gold. But you know you can leave your troubles all behind. Come on, drive on, let the engines roar. Come on, drive on, try to close the door to the bed and turn the song. I swear your heart should really come along. Come on, drive on, right across the shore. Come on, drive.
Oke, sip. Udah aku taruh-taruhin di waiting room. Diusik secara halus. Oke.
Remove-removein ya.
Oke, yuk. Kita mulai dari Emira dulu, silakan.
Oke, menurut aku lancar acaranya, surprisingly ya. Nggak ada isu teknis atau gimana-gimana, cuma tadi paling di awal aja yang bagian musik. Mungkin kedepannya kalau misalnya musik-musik itu kita nggak harus ngewajibin share screen kali ya untuk menghindari error-error kayak gitu. Cuma kalau kataku sih